Hiya, Matt.
Hey Graham, nice to see you.
Good to see you. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. You?
Good. I'm all right. Thanks. I'm all right. I'm looking forward to this conversation about money. So
Yeah.
this is the Crazy in Love podcast. We look at a lot of different elements of healthy or unhealthy relationships. And today we're going to focus on money in relationships. It can be a wonderful thing, money, but it can also be a source of stress, anxiety, tension in relationships. And today I'm hoping we can unpack some, if not all of that. What's just as your kind of start for 10, Matt, what are you coming into this conversation with and hoping to achieve in terms of our conversation today? What's your line really on money and relationships?
Yeah, I think maybe that headline point is that you just can't ignore it. It's one of those things that's far too important and significant to us to ignore. So it's one of the main reasons for conflicts within relationships. That's sort of maybe point number one. And
Yeah.
in order to get anywhere, you're gonna have to be honest about like how much you've got, how much you want, what you're prepared to do with it, how you split it between you, those sorts of things. And if you were giving me 10 seconds more, I would say it is like everything in a relationship is going to end up requiring you to compromise, meet in the middle, take turns, retire things that don't matter too much to you, except that the other person has a strong point of view and you don't, or where you've got a very strong point of view, to stick in there and argue for it and try and persuade the other person in the end, like anything, where you go on holiday, how you raise the children, choices about schooling, how much time you spend with in-laws. Gonna have to talk about it and find a compromise.
You make it sound quite easy.
It's
Well,
dead,
I
dead,
don't
dead.
imagine in reality it is. Let's tease out where it can be a problem because, as we've talked about elsewhere, I think about three quarters of couples see money as a source of stress in their relationships. That's quite a lot of people
Oh,
who
isn't it? Yeah, it's high.
arguing about money in or there's tension about money in relationships. And I think about the same number of people say that they want more money, or they're under the assumption or the illusion that more money will make their lives, including their relationships, easier. What do
Yeah,
you make
yeah.
of those numbers?
Yeah, I mean those numbers are about right. You're not wrong on those, and I think both of them are quite surprising, aren't they? I suppose that's what I make of it. That many people, the vast majority of people in relationships, are stressed about money or arguing about it, find it difficult, and that we want more money. I mean that bit, I suppose, is maybe less intriguing. I work with people who quite often have got lots of money. Some of them are seriously wealthy, measured into the tens and hundreds of millions and sometimes even more than that. But money is never not a thing. Money is never not on the table. We're never not talking about money. It comes with all sorts of things. And they might seem patently ridiculous to you, a security team, or, conversations about investments and, legacy planning and trust funds and whatever else. But for everybody, whether it's really quite tight or whether it's in abundance, it seems to matter a lot. And quite often, even when people have got money, they want more.
So maybe that's one of the kind of key illusions of money in relationships, is that if money is tight, the illusion is that, well, if we just earn that little bit more, that
Yeah,
the tension around money will disappear in the relationship.
yeah, sure, yeah. And there's something about all of those people who are in relationships now who have grown up in families where
Yeah.
money's been a stressful thing. So I think we import baggage, don't we? And we often think maybe if money hadn't been so tight in our growing up, it would be easier. Like we take that lesson, it's sort of 2 + 2 = 5, or 15 or something. Because I don't think that's quite true. I think about my start in life and upbringing, we definitely didn't have an abundance of money, the opposite really. But that wasn't the problem in the family. The problem wasn't we played like battered board games in a caravan and had a lovely time. The problem was, light elsewhere. So I think sometimes assuming a bit of extra money, better quality of holidays, nicer car, mostly an illusion, I think. What do you
Mm.
think, though? Is that a bit pie in the sky? You and I sit here having done okay in the world, probably not having any real material worries. Is that a bit smug?
I wouldn't say it's a bit smug, but I think that there are a couple of categories in which money can impact a relationship. I do think that there's an awful lot of families where and we probably don't see them that much in private practice in therapy because they can't afford to come in the
Yeah,
main,
sure.
is that it causes such stress in their lives more generally that inevitably means that it impacts the relationship. It means that they can't be fully present in their love for each other and and be calm in the evenings and enjoy romantic times together because they're so genuinely stressed out by making ends meet and getting the kids to school on time and getting a good hot meal into their kids every day. They don't have enough money to do it. So I think there is a reality of, if you're at the bottom end of the income scale, that can cause enormous pressure on relationships that I think you could be with someone who you would end up being happy with, but because your economic circumstances are such that it's just causing undue strain on any relationship that you could have. I think there is a group of couples who are in that situation. I
Yeah.
think the majority of couples that we see where money is a daily issue is more about different values, isn't it? It's more about resentments as well about who's spending money where. Is one person spending it more on their present selves as opposed to thinking about our future? Is one person trying hard to earn more, or are they just coasting along? It's those kind of tensions and frustrations that and resentments that tend to get in the way of
Yeah. Yeah.
relationships, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. One of the things we refer to in the article in Psychology Today that this conversation is sort of loosely based around is that really popular book, The Psychology of Money.
Yeah.
60 million copies or something crazy sold, and there are a few messages in that, but the primary message of The Psychology of Money is that money has a kind of feel to it, that it's emotional as well, that it symbolizes things, and that it has a darker side. It can fuel the worst in us, greed, fear, entitlement, those sorts of things. I'm switching conversation tack slightly, but I think that's the other thing to notice about money. If you had a bit more of it, it's not just great. It can do all the things that a small amount of money can do, or a medium amount of money and a larger amount of money. It doesn't necessarily follow on. I'm not completely convinced more money, more problems, but there is a bit like it doesn't solve what you think it's going to solve. There's another side to wrestle with. You can't sidestep money, even if you're behaving in a monkish, fashion, and you're withdrawing from the world, you're taking yourself out of the game. You're doing so because money really matters to you. You hate what it represents. You fear what it represents. Environmental damage. Stress, inequality, whatever it might be. We're all trying to do something in relation to money.
Good. So let's maybe think through some of the ways money can be a dark force in relationships. So what sort of things do you see in the couples that you work with? How does money manifest itself in those kind of more status bound dark ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think you see greed and entitlement oftentimes. I think an assumption that money will do something for you that it can't. So it sort of takes you away from more simple pleasures. It takes you away from time and connection. So some guys I see, this is not true of all of the guys I see by any means, but some of them are working so damned hard that they're really not spending any time in the family. Just to give a kind of commonplace example, they're not really maintaining their romantic connection with their partner, and that feels like a crazy thing to do, I suppose. There's something about earning money, isn't there? Making sure the family is taken care of even to a good standard. Those are income generating years often for, I'm thinking of the men I see, but it is nuts if you're not seeing the kids play football, practice their violin. You're never at a parents' evening. You're never enjoying just hanging out with them and hearing the silly things they say and the fun things they say, and helping them wrestle with the world and step through life. So I suppose it can be a massive distraction. Would be one answer to your question.
Or a deliberate avoidance, right? The
Right.
money is such a emotional foundation for that person, a sense of security, and their identity through work and through the money that they earn is such an integral part of their, for want of a better phrase, kind of ego strength, right? Their sense of self, their sense of security, that actually then a big part of them doesn't want to be at home doing the boring stuff of washing the dishes and cooking the kids dinner. They prefer the drive and energy of being the high earning, often alpha male, right?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that's a good call. I think that's there too, isn't it? And it has a sort of habitual quality and addictive quality. Money, I think, like many things that we do over and over, we get good at it. There's that quote that you didn't love in the article from Rockefeller. Asked how much money's enough, he says something like $1 more. Query, did he ever say it or not?
I like the quote. He just never said it.
We don't worry about that. It's that thing, isn't it? There's always like that little bit more to go after. I think in the article we talk about it being like an appetite. I think that's quite a useful way of understanding it. Like all appetites, they usually want right sizing, aren't they? A little bit of ice cream can be a delicious thing. Second bowl is a bit like it's too much, right? You don't feel good at the end of that. Third bowl is perfectly revolting. It's like you've got to get that into the right size and shape. I think whatever that means to you, I don't think there's an optimum amount necessarily, but something about knowing like what's enough and knowing how to balance that across your other priorities, hobbies, health, seeing the family grow up, friends, whatever it might be.
Is it potentially, on the basis of all this, easier to be in a relationship than with someone who is a similar sort of place on the socioeconomic spectrum? Is it easier to end up with someone who has similar expectations as you on things like how much they're going to earn, what sort of house you want to live in, where to send the kids to school, those kind of things, that often this myth of I just want to marry someone who's got loads of money and my life will be easier is not true, because if your values are fundamentally different around those sorts of things, you're going to find yourself in some sticky situations where your values clash.
Yeah, I think that is the way through this. That's the way to think about it. What are the values? And I think they can be broader than money. So I think if the values are in line, then I think you'll probably be okay if one person is earning a fortune and the other is maybe not working or just doing something which is
Really, let's just pause on that though, because I think I'm probably a bit less convinced of that than you, because
well, I was going to
see
ask
it.
what you think from your work, because I guess you probably just sort of where you are in the world and what you're doing right now, you're probably seeing a bit less of that disparity. Is that true? Have I got that right? Like
Definitely, and where there is a disparity, I tend to see it being a problem. Yeah. And maybe that's just self-selecting couples who are coming to see me where there is an existing problem, of course, but yeah, when there's a notable difference, when one person feels or both people feel like they're sacrificing parts of their lives, whether it's someone who stepped away from the world of work to kind of do the more of the family household type work, is often inevitably the woman. And the man who feels like he's having to, in effect, pay for both parties in the relationship, kind of that if the gap there is too big between them, and that isn't talked about at the earliest stages of a relationship, I think that can have echoes for years and years and years down the line, and deep resentments.
That's very interesting. And do you see the opposite, where couples have either come to an agreement if they're in those kind of child raising years, or they're ahead of that point where they're roughly equal, that it feels a little easier, you have fewer conversations about money, there's less disagreement in those circumstances?
I certainly see situations where there's been a healthy adult conversation about money and about career expectations, and then it often becomes a kind of internalized fight against the guilt of stepping back and saying, oh, well, my husband or wife goes out and earns the daily bread and works their ass off, and I'm kind of staying home doing what others might see as the easier part of things, and there can be quite a lot of guilt involved there. So often the work at that point moves more internal rather than in the couple, if that makes a bit of sense. But yeah, I see couples who do that process well. They often tend to be the ones who are emotionally quite capable. I'll be honest, they don't tend to be the kind of more emotionally insecure people. They tend to be people who know their own partner and trust their partner and can have that kind of conversations. Their relationship tends to be in a good place at the point of those conversations anyway.
I was thinking of a few people I've seen in the sort of I don't know in the past who I think have probably got a shared value around money, so they're getting something right, even though their role around money in the world's really different. So a couple that I'm thinking of where the guy is working really hard, traveling quite a bit to make a considerable amount of money, and she is at home in that sort of traditional setup that you're describing, but she's also working hard. You know, she is with the money they probably could employ staff. You know, they've got some,
Mm,
as you'd expect, you know, cleaner and whatnot, and someone doing the garden and that. But it's not a very moneyed life with tons and tons of stuff. She is there, you know, curating play dates and hosting other children and ferrying and doing those kind of things. And if there's food for the kids, she's making it. So she's at home, really busy home, making that her focus. The sort of shared value is, I don't know, it's probably a bit more sophisticated than we both work hard, but they're both working hard in that way
mm.
and very appreciative of what one another are doing. You know,
Well,
seem
that's the
to
crucial bit, isn't it?
sincerely appreciative of what
Mm,
you're doing. And I think also, I don't know whether they've got a number or a date when they're stopping, but a notion that this will switch, that this will flip, that the children will be different at 5 and 8 than they are at, you know, those infant years, will be different again as they transition to secondary school. And then, you know, life changes again in that sort of third act when the children fly the nest. So I suppose just some shared values, whether or not they've been very, very explicit about talking about that or identifying those things, respect for
yeah.
one another, and quite similar to, they're on the same page, I suppose, is how I'd say it.
Yeah, I think the values are the foundation of it. I think the consideration and gratitude for the partner is the bit that I really jumped on in what you were
Right.
talking about. That I think that's a really hard thing to do over the years. The person who's getting up at 6 a.m. to go out in the dark to get that horrible packed train into London to work really hard during the day just doesn't see all the crap that the other person has to do at home. Often the woman has to do at home. Doesn't really necessarily appreciate it over the years. And I think that can manifest as arguments about money that are actually, as you were talking about earlier, probably about something else, probably just about what the agreement is between the two of you and the values on which that's based becoming live and becoming regularly talked about and regularly considered and regularly appreciated.
Yeah, it's good. That's good, isn't it? I was thinking about, you know, sticking with that same example. The guy was traveling and traveling to interesting places in the world that you'd like to go to. So less on a packed train and more in New York, you know, and of course there's a dinner and of course there's a function. And, you know, of course there are things that are enjoyable and
Mm.
agreeable about that. And you could spark on that as the other party, couldn't you? All they're doing is going to dinner and they're getting drunk, you know, whatever it might be. You could feel quite resentful. You could feel fed up about that. Similarly, I never heard him say, all she's doing is fixing a bit of food for the kids and just putting a pizza in the, you know, you could quickly turn that into disparaging the other one. All she does is kind of bum around the house. All he does is go out and drink with, you know.
Exactly. And if that is what the guilt I was talking about earlier is almost that conversation going internally. So it becomes like all I'm doing is doing the washing. All I'm doing is cooking the children's dinners. All I'm doing is tidying up. And there's something about either it gets manifested in conflict between the couple or it goes inwards. And I guess what we're talking about is two people trying to continually talk about and live in line with those
Yeah.
values, which is easier said than done. And
Yeah.
maybe we can kind of tease it out with some kind of practical interventions, because when often money is talked about with couples, you talk about things like prenups, you talk about things like shared bank accounts and the pros and cons of them. I think our line would be more those individual practical interventions are more dependent on the couple, right? There's no right or wrong about whether the two of you have a shared bank account or whether you keep some money aside for yourself to do the things that you care about. There's no right
Yeah.
or wrong about those things. It's more make sure you're talking about that, not hiding things from your partner as well.
Yeah, I think if there's a toolkit, it's those questions, isn't it? I think we called them like big questions in the piece. You know, there's some serious questions to tackle together that you won't tackle in one hit, and you'll probably be surprised actually that you maybe start from a different place on those. It will take a little bit of working out. You'll return to them over and over. So just that kind of notion of whether you should be saving for the future or, you know, enjoying and living in the moment. There isn't really a right or wrong on that. Yes, sure, you want a little bit of buffer around you and some savings, don't you? But given tomorrow's not promised, you might also want to enjoy today. We're going to have to think about that, like where the balance lies, and where it lies when the children are little or before you've had children is different from when they're going away to uni, right? Should you have the same bank account? Do you share a bank account? Are those separate? Are you, if your income is similar, are you doing 50-50? If it's like wildly split, you're probably doing something in proportion, aren't you? If you get a bonus, am I having some of that? Am I having the
Yeah.
percentage of that that is my salary? Is it all yours? Does it go automatically into a savings account? Are we automatically paying down debt with that? Or is that treat money? Is it special money? Is it
Deeply unromantic, this conversation is. How to sap the romance from a relationship. Let's talk about debt. Well,
yeah,
this comes alive in certain situations for very kind of everyday decisions, though, doesn't it? So some of these values that you talk about and some of the questions feel quite medium and long term, but what I often see it as, he's often making these kind of decisions. You know, he likes to gamble at weekends, or she likes expensive jackets, or he likes expensive sneakers, or whatever it might be. And it's these kind of, well, we've agreed that there's a pot of money that we share, but it feels like he's taking 70% of it with his impulsive decisions. How do you work through that?
yeah, yeah. That's a good one, isn't it? And I guess, like, I think your challenge on whether it feels romantic is a good one, and it's sort of, it is partly, I'm guessing you're being lighthearted, and partly it's serious. But I think we've got a notion that everything in a relationship is romantic or has to be kind of fun or enjoyable. It just ain't, is it? And I think the much bigger risk is if you don't tackle those things about what you're spending and what you're saving, and you don't get a little bit practical and specific about those things. What will happen is, like close to the example you're giving, where somebody carries on doing a thing because they didn't realize it was a problem, or they don't ask, don't tell, and it is a big problem, and those are the resentments that build up. I think that's your caseload and mine, seeing people at the back end of years of getting really fed up with one another, really cross with one another, feeling like routinely disrespected in a financial domain, in other areas of life. And then it's huge, isn't it? We're unpicking loads. So I don't think the conversations that I was sort of suggesting are particularly lovely or make you feel amorous towards your partner. But I think it's much better to tackle that stuff, and then, you know, you've got a big sort of field to graze in after you've done that, rather than those things are always with you and you're having quite a nice night out, but you do feel your partner takes liberties. You're having quite a nice time on holiday, but actually you didn't really get choice about where you went, and the room is too expensive, or that, you know, it's like it's not big enough, or you would have liked to view, or you were hoping it would be a bit nearer that, you know.
Yeah, completely. And I know I was partly joking and partly not joking that it's, you know, the reality of relationships. So often we talk about the kind of unromantic bits of it, don't we? We talk about the
Yeah,
conversations that prevent trouble along the line, and they can be quite unromantic. But
yeah,
there can be a real sense of security in knowing that leads to romance,
yeah,
in knowing that you're with someone who shares your worldview and isn't hiding things from you. And if you're someone who's a bit more like me, who's maybe a bit more financially conservative and likes to plan and doesn't like the idea of being in debt, yeah, and like you were saying about holidays, if I spent loads of money on a holiday, from day one, I'd probably not enjoy it. I'd probably be feeling like awkward, and it wouldn't feel romantic because I couldn't be in that headspace.
yeah. Got it,
Whereas
got it.
if we'd planned it 2 years in advance and we knew we could afford it, I could lean into the romance from day one. So it is kind of a foundation for romance, even if
Yeah.
the conversations themselves are not very romantic.
Yeah, and not necessarily confined to money, but when the couples I'm working with can resolve an issue that felt like a conflict or that looked like a roadblock, and they step through it in a constructive way, they try and take the other person's perspective, they take their points on board, and then they come to some kind of accommodation, or one person just trades and, you know, decides, actually that's less important to me than I first thought, and if it really means a lot to you, I'm really happy to let you, you know, call it this time. They're quite they're really quite pleased to have done that. There's quite an uplift in their mood, in their manner, in their body language, that they've done a thing. So it might not be like romantic, but it's like, oh, we can do this. It gives them hope. There is something, I think, quite life affirming about that. You see a kind of bit of energy come with those. We step through a difficult thing together. We feel like we're a team. We feel like we're genuinely, able to solve problems. Does give them a spring in their step, I think, quite often, even though the thing they're talking about is quite prosaic and boring.
What about regularity of conversations? The evidence suggests that couples who talk more about money are more content. Like, there's obviously a correlational rather than a causational relationship there, but it seems to suggest that frequent conversations, even though they might not be that romantic, are actually, like we were saying, kind of helpful to build a foundation of emotional security. You don't need to go over those values all the time, do you? And kind of repick those values, but just checking that your decisions on an individual and collective basis are in line with those values seems to make sense. Just checking in from time to time.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think my wife would mind me sharing that we have Task Club on a regular basis. And
Club. No, you got to say more about that.
It's not at all interesting. It's like just the series of tasks we've got to do, money being one of them, right? We tend to do that on a monthly or so basis. Like, what are we looking at in terms of the boys' schedule? What kind of diary dates have we got coming up? There's a little bit of have we seen one another? Have we remembered to go out and do those kinds of fun things together? Because you can lose track of that, I think, over time. You realize that it's been months before we've done anything for ourselves. So we're running through, like, the boring stuff of life, the admin, really, who's there, who's picking up, who around us is helping us out, friends, and all of that kind of stuff. But what it does for me, and part of the reason I think we set that up, is because I don't really want to do it when we're out at dinner, or I don't really want to do it bar before we're watching a bit of stand-up comedy or something, if we have gone out, because it isn't an easy conversation. Sometimes it is annoying, like, you're out again, like, I'm left with how come I'm picking them up again for the that kind of stuff. So there's a bit of a it's time bounded, right? It's a meeting, and we get through it as best we can, but it clears space for the other thing. So we're not trying to do it over dinner, and we're not talking about things that are likely to be a wind up or irritating, or just get in the way of a more relaxed conversation in a different on a different day. Does that make sense?
What I like about that is the shared ownership of it. I think in relationships I've been in, the ones that I've seen in the couples work I do, there's often a tendency for one person to be the kind of financial controller of the relationship, and I think that can breed resentment on both sides. That it almost infantilizes the other person into a position of, oh, I'm not the one who knows about the bills, I'm not the one who is controlled, is in control of where the ingoings and outgoings are. And I think that can be a source of tension. What I like in your example is that you're both owning that to some degree.
Yeah. No, and it's got all of the imperfections that you'd expect and whatever, but I think that would be the thing for us as well. And I think there've been moments in earlier stages of the relationship where one person has tried to take the lead, or has tried to kind of throw it over the fence to the other person for them to do it. It's what the guy who did the Netflix show and the book called Your Rich Life, he's been on the Diary of a Chief Executive, I can't remember what his name is, but he says, like, that won't do. Like, that's usually like a big problem in a relationship, because it's usually that somebody is avoiding the conversation. You're so much better at this than me. You've got it all organized. You've got the spread. And it's like, it's really rude, and it's avoidant behavior, isn't it? And for him, it would be a red flag. And, whether or not we cast it in exactly those terms, I think he's on to something, you're on to something. It's got to be a shared endeavor. It doesn't matter if you don't like it. Do I like doing those money conversations?
No, exactly.
No, not really. Like, are they favorite part of my week or month? No, but are they necessary? Are they useful? Does it clear the decks for the more fun stuff?
No, sure. I think the mistake is often because one party worries about it more and is more kind of, I'm the one who will be checking the bank account every day and making sure that everything's kind of squared off. Doesn't mean I enjoy it. Doesn't mean I want to do it. But I think there's a mistake made that, well, you're the one that worries about those. So you look after those.
Yeah, it's the maybe this should be our final thought. I don't know, but it's the other meaning of the Crazy in Love title, like, that we chose for these series of conversations for the podcast, because we've got such crazy notions of what it means to be in love, that we won't do anything difficult, or that nothing will be hard, or, you know, it's such an immature conversation, really, sort of public discourse around love and relationships, isn't it? That people will be completing us, and it will be all of those things. And so, well, sure, there's those really elevated moments, aren't there? There's real joy being with somebody, but there is also the laundry, there's also the dishes, there's also the, you know, the money, the spreadsheets.
Yeah, deeply unromantic. One final question for you. What's the admission criteria for Task Club? Like, what do our listeners have to do to be invited to be part of those monthly conversations?
With me? No, I mean, I sometimes offer those things to my clients as you could do
Yeah.
this, and I don't mind it seeming a bit sort of stilted or
No, definitely.
you know, because and call it whatever you want. You know, if you want a more serious title for it, or you want, you know, you want something else, change the frequency. Doesn't matter. It's really just the coming together on those things, isn't it? All of that stuff that often does get in the way of the more fun romantic things. So I think, you know, I would say to them, seize the initiative. You know, it's a suggestion, isn't it? Kickstart it. See what it feels like to have an honest conversation about money or anything else. It's not as bad as you were fearing.
Good. Let's leave it there.
Yeah. All right. Nice one.
Nice to see you.
Yeah. Good to see you. Cheers.
Take care. See ya. Bye.